Among the problems of our modern era has been resolving the subject-object dichotomy proposed by Descartes and refined by Newton, the belief that reality consists of matter and motion. And there is no question that cannot be answered by means of the scientific method of objective observation and measurement. This egocentric perspective has been cast into doubt by evidence from quantum mechanics that matter and motion are interdependent forms of energy, and that the observer is always in experiential relationship with the observed. One alternative is biocentrism, which assumes that time and space are not objects or things, but forms of animal sense perception. To understand ourselves as interconnected beings that experience time and space rather than being subject to them takes a radical shift of perspective, and it should not be surprising that artists have been at the leading edge of this exploration. From Duchamp and Dada to Cage and Fluxus, to Wiley and his West Coast colleagues, to the recent international explosion of participatory artwork, artists have been trying to get us to change how we see. Nor should it be surprising that Asian perspectives regarding the nature of reality have been a crucial factor in affecting this shift. The ambitious Guggenheim exhibition, The Third Mind, emphasized the importance of Asia for the development of American modernism. Today, I want to discuss an aspect of American modernism that was not included in that exhibition, American Dada. Taking Daoism as my example, I hope to show that during the early part of the 20th century, Asian philosophy was available to American modernists primarily by way of Europe, particularly during the period from 1915 into the early 1920s, predating the interest in Zen Buddhism in the US following World War II. This was a time when pacifist European artists were inspired by American technological culture and encouraged by democratic American society to develop a new visual language. Their American counterparts, most of whom had spent time studying and working in Europe, met them more than halfway. For my part, I confess that when I wrote my book about manifestations of Asian philosophy within Western art, I didn't really understand Daoism. I still don't, but you do what you can. I can forgive myself since there has been so much mixing of Daoism and Buddhism over the centuries that it is hard to separate them when looking for their so-called influence in European and American art. But I overlooked the importance of Daoism as a model for Dada, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to correct this oversight by discussing a few examples of how ancient Chinese conceptions of reality, perception, and artistic creation may have manifested within American Dada. The full range of resources drawn upon by Marcel Duchamp and his colleagues in the United States is so varied that any new understanding of the relevance of Asian traditions to their work still provides only fragmentary evidence of these artists' intentions. But it is evidence that, until recently, has been largely overlooked and is still regarded in some quarters as insufficiently intellectual or theoretical. I hope to show that it was precisely the anti-intellectual and anti-theoretical nature of American Dada that Daoism helped nourish. Dada means nothing, reads the first heading of Tristan Tzar's Dada Manifesto 1918. The following year, Raoul Hausmann similarly characterized Dada as nothing, i.e., everything. And Francis Picabia, in his own Dada Manifesto of 1920, wrote, "It's doing something so that the public can say, we understand nothing, nothing, nothing." Signing his manifesto, Francis Picabia, who knows nothing, nothing, nothing. In 1921, Marcel Duchamp told a reporter, "Dada is nothing." For instance, the Dadaists say that everything is nothing. Nothing is good. Nothing is interesting. Nothing is important. And in 1922, Tzar asserted, "Dada applies itself to everything, and yet it is nothing." It is the point where the yes and the no and all the opposites meet, not solemnly in the castles of human philosophies, but very simply at street corners like dogs. Where did this anti-intellectual ideal of nothing come from? According to those most directly involved, Daoism was an important source. Zara claimed, Zhangzi was just as Dada as we are. You are mistaken if you take Dada for a modern school or even for a reaction against the schools of today. He went on to characterize Dada in terms usually applied to Daoism. Quote, Dada is a state of mind. That is why it transforms itself according to races and events. Hans Arp similarly stressed the Daoist as taproot of Dada. Quote, Dada objects are made of found or manufactured elements, simple or incongruous. The Chinese, several millenniums ago, Duchamp and Picabia in the United States, and Schwitters and myself during World War I were the first to invent and spread these games of wisdom and acumen that were meant to cure human beings of the sheer madness of genius and lead them back more modestly to their proper place in nature. Like Arp, who specified Duchamp and Picabia in the United States, Richard Hulsenbeck emphasized the American context in his introduction to the 1920 Dada Almanac. One cannot understand Dada, one must experience it. Dada is the neutral point between content and form, male and female, matter and spirit. Dada is the American aspect of Buddhism. It blusters because it knows how to be quiet. It agitates because it is at peace. Hulsenbeck cites Buddhism, but his language is Daoist. This may suggest a certain lack of clarity, perhaps not surprising from artists interested in Asian philosophies primarily as resources for their own work. Lest anyone accuse them of naive Orientalism, let me quote from poet Walter Mehring's tongue-in-cheek unveilings, also published in the Dada Almanac. The East Asian Society protests at the way Dada is wrecking Asiatic culture. Buddhism absorbed key Daoist concepts when it reached China, where Chan Japanese Zen Buddhism was one result, and Daoism returned the favor, generating hybrid practices that might be labeled Dabu. Dabu, a contraction of the first two letters of the words Tao and Buddha, was in fact what Marcel Duchamp's brother-in-law, Jean-Claude Coty, called the version of Dada he and Suzanne Duchamp practiced. Coty dated his second birth to 1915, the year he moved to New York and became close to Duchamp. And I just want to mention, I believe his papers, Coty's papers, are in the archives of American art. So if anyone wanted to look more into him, he's very interesting for the way he combines Daoist and Buddhist references. What was it about Daoism that might have appealed to artists around the time of the First World War? Several things, including Daoism's sexually charged view of the cosmos as a continuously self-balancing system, its emphasis on perception and on perspective, and perhaps most important, its assumption of the self-transforming power of the individual and rejection of social conventions and definitions. There is yet another aspect of Daoism that would have appealed to these artists, the Daoist view of creativity. In their philosophical analysis of the Tao Te Ching, Roger Ames and David Hall point out that in the Judeo-Christian worldview, with this omnipotent maker, all subsequent acts of creativity are in fact secondary and derivative exercises of power. In contrast, real creativity, and this is a quote, real creativity can make sense only in a Taoist processual world, I have a quote here, that admits of ontological parity among its constitutive elements and of the spontaneous emergence of novelty. Creativity is always reflexive and is exercised over and with respect to self, And since self in a processive world is always communal, creativity is contextual, transactional, and multidimensional. This analysis reads like a recipe for Dada artworks, which, as Hans Arp wrote, tend to be made of found or manufactured elements, simple or incongruous. It also challenges the art historical impulse to try and pin down precise authorship for Dada objects and events. Consider God, an upside-down plumbing trap affixed to a wooden miter box around 1917 by the German-born Dada artist and poet Elsa von Freytag-Lorenhoven and the Philadelphia painter Morton Schomburg. Without getting into issues of authorship, let me mention that the piece combines Schomburg's rigor with Freytag-Lorenhoven's talent for shock. I'm more interested in the title, God, which, this being a work of Dada, we tend to interpret humorously, or at least ironically. Indeed, attached to an unglamorous, usually hidden portion of a plumbing fixture, the title has been read as both. But this does not fully address the artist's intent. How might someone versed in both Daoism and modern plumbing experience this piece together with its title? A plumbing trap is a low point in the evacuation of waste, creating a water seal that prevents sewer gas from passing into occupied space. It thus traps the free flow of air, and thanks to gravity, it tends to trap other things as well. Traps are notorious villains in backed-up plumbing scenarios. Now, anyone who knows anything about Daoism knows that it is all about open, uncomplicated, free flow. In fact, the earliest appearance of the word Dao in the ancient Chinese Book of Documents has to do with cutting a channel in order to prevent the overflowing of riverbanks. From a Daoist perspective, God evokes the ironic and, yes, funny concept of a constipated, omnipotent, supreme being, along with the serious thought that there might be other possibilities for conceiving the workings of the universe. There is another reason why God is a quintessential example of Dada's Daoist perspective: its existence as embodied metaphor. Because the concepts of Daoism are so abstract, the language of Daoism is the language of metaphor. Nature is a primary source of metaphorical meaning, but so is technology, which is fundamentally the harnessing and channeling of natural forces. The wheel, for example, becomes a metaphor for the fecundity of nothingness in chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. The 30 spokes converge at one hub, but the utility of the cart is a function of the nothingness inside the hub. Thus, it might be something that provides the value, but it is nothing that provides the utility. Cart might be any vehicle. Substitute art, and we have 30 spokes converge at one hub, but the utility of the art is a function of the nothingness inside. An image that suggests Duchamp's first ready-made bicycle wheel and his concept of the art coefficient, or gap. Duchamp believed that what art is, in reality, is this missing link, not the links which exist. It's not what you see that is art. Art is the gap. Oops, one slide behind. There you go. Machine technology became American Dada's metaphor. And Daoist descriptions of the rotational circulation of qi energy throughout the body as an hydraulic process and the intensification of qi into jing, or essence, through a kind of shifting of gears, seems to have provided a model. As early as 1911, Marcel Duchamp integrated the mechanical draftsman's dotted line and directional arrow into his otherwise painterly coffee mill. Duchamp described this coffee mill as something which I made to explode. The grounds are tumbling down beside it. The gear wheels are above, and the knob is seen simultaneously at several points in its circuit, with an arrow to indicate movement. Without knowing it, I had opened a window onto something else. When pressed about whether coffee mill had any symbolic significance, Duchamp replied, "None at all," adding, "It was a sort of escape hatch You know, I've always felt this need to escape myself. As a window or escape hatch, Coffee Mill seems to have been not a symbol of, but a metaphor for Duchamp's escape from habits of perceiving and experiencing reality. Duchamp's even more mechanistic Chocolate Grinder number 1 and Chocolate Grinder number 2 were shown in New York in the spring of 1915 and again in 1916. Another catalyst for American artists was Duchamp's close friend, Francis Picabia, who arrived in New York at the beginning of June 1915, 2 weeks before Duchamp. The preceding year in Paris, Picabia had incorporated a Daoist yin-yang symbol into Comic Wedlock, a painting whose theme was likely influenced by Duchamp's plans for the bride stripped bare by her bachelors, even a work that he would make in the United States. At this time, Duchamp's influence on Picabia's work was evident more in terms of content than style. Still resolutely wrestling with abstraction, Picabia's use of the yin-yang form was anomalous in both its specificity and its symbolic intent. Marius de Zayas, in Paris in 1914 on a scouting mission on behalf of Alfred Stieglitz's Gallery 291, suggested a show of Picabia's recent paintings to follow a planned Picasso show. And he wrote to Stieglitz, Picasso represents in his work the action of matter on the senses, while Picabia's work is the expression of pure thought. Picasso could never work without dealing with objectivity, while Picabia forgets matter to express only maybe the memory of something that has happened. The maybe suggests hesitation on de Zayas's part. One thing seems clear, the memory of something that has happened was a mental something that, at least in the case of Comic Wedlock, had to do with copulation that was not sensual. Other titles of Picabia paintings from this time likewise suggest an experiential mental realm, udni, a scrambling and contraction of unidimensional, and edaunisal, these are a little unpronounceable, edaunisal, derived from étoile danseuse or star dancer. Note the Dao in edaunisal. Picabia was struggling to give sensual form to mental experience in Paris. It is paradoxically perfect that the door to representation of the unidimensional or immaterial would finally open to him in the context of the resolutely material culture of the United States. Upon his arrival, Picabia immersed himself in the goings-on surrounding Stieglitz's gallery. The July-August 1915 issue of the new large-format journal 291, a successor to Stieglitz's camera work, edited by de Zayas, featured 6 powerful Picabia portrait drawings of 291 associates for which machines and technology provided the metaphors and American advertising the model. William Camfield has pointed out how fitting it is, quote, that Picabia's machinist style began in New York, where in 1913 he had experienced his first overwhelming encounter with a modern machine-age city. This was when Picabia visited in connection with the Armory show. Further enriched by the conviction of Stieglitz that art could be produced by a machine, the camera. Picabia's portrait of this apostle of American modernism appeared on the cover of 291's July-August issue. That Picabia intended to portray Stieglitz as an apostle seems clear from the inscription. It's in French, but it translates as, here is Stieglitz, faith and love. Surely an affectionate riff on the Apostle Paul's assurance to the Corinthians, so abide faith, hope, and love. Here Stieglitz is the hope. Picabia's icon for Stieglitz is made up of 2 mechanical elements, a camera with its bellows detached, preventing recording of exterior images on the photographic plate, and a similarly disengaged brake and gear shift, controls for starting and stopping. Only the lens at the top of the camera seems to be in active mode, stretched heavenward, as if anticipating Stieglitz's future cloud portrait equivalence and focused on the word ideal. And I want to point out that it seems as though maybe the bellows has become detached because the lens has been stretching so hard to capture the ideal that it's kind of stretched beyond the limits. The detached bellows has elicited comments ranging from implications regarding Stieglitz's sexual potency to Picabia's supposed opinion of the success of Gallery 291. With the Daoist perspective in mind, I want to suggest something quite different. A bellows is the expandable part of a camera, but it is also a device for generating a strong current of air. In Chapter 5, the Tao Te Ching, the bellows becomes a technological metaphor for the indeterminate source of spontaneous and inexhaustible phenomena. What is between the heavens and the earth resembles a bellows that is empty yet never exhausted. Put into motion, it yields more and more. In Taoism, the earth is conceived as yin, female, receptive, dark, and the heavens as yang, male, aggressive, light. They are opposites whose union generates constantly morphing phenomena. What Picabia's detached bellows implies is that Stieglitz is a catalyst for change, but his camera work cannot be portrayed in terms of the mechanically recordable visible world. Stieglitz called this his anti-photographic search, the vision of both the inner and the outer eye, a double view of reality conveyed in the famous first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Nameless is the source of heaven and earth. Named, it is the mother of all things. This is why, when one is steadily free of the passions, one sees one's spiritual essence. Immersed in the sensual, one sees bounded form. These two things have a single origin and are called by different names. One calls them both profound. They are profound, doubly deep. This is the portal to all things. Picabia's break and gear shift may refer to what is required in order to achieve this complete vision of reality. Having both your gear shift and break disengaged just might be the perfect modern metaphor for being steadily free of the passions. In Daoist inner alchemy, this state of equilibrium is an ongoing dynamic achievement, a process of distilling qi energy into Jing essence. Picabia's ideal is printed in German Gothic type, perhaps a reference to Stieglitz's German background in education. Jay Bachner has written insightfully about how often the word ideal appears in Picabia's work in exactly the same position as on the pages here, hovering at the top. But it is also helpful to look at what Stieglitz had to say about his cloud portraits. Are the sky and the water not one if one truly sees them? Are they not, after all, to be seen as interchangeable? In fact, I feel that all experiences in life are one, if truly seen. How is it possible to conceive of black without white? Why reject either the one or the other, since both exist? I feel the duality of the world forces forever at work. But it is when conflict hovers about a point, a focal point, and light is in the ascendancy, that I am moved. Stieglitz's yin-yang focal point found an earlier manifestation as a point of light in Duchamp's fountain, surely the exemplar of how Dada artworks served as contextual, transactional, and multidimensional objects of public art practice. Since, like virtually all of Duchamp's ready-mades, fountain has somehow mysteriously disappeared, I am showing the only piece of visual evidence that it actually existed. The photograph Alfred Stieglitz took at 291 for publication in the same issue of The Blind Man as Louise Norton's Apologia Buddha of the bathroom. According to the artist Beatrice Wood, who apparently made the first contact, Stieglitz and Duchamp had a long discussion about how to photograph the piece. Stieglitz, Wood wrote, took great pains with the lighting. Duchamp had signed the urinal R. Mutt, purportedly after Mott Ironworks, a plumbing supply company. Said with a French accent, Mutt is moot, meeting, or mute, silent, but also perhaps shorthand for mutable, the same word in both French and English, meaning changeable. A female friend of mine, Duchamp wrote his sister Suzanne, using a male pseudonym, submitted a porcelain urinal as a sculpture. In a letter to Georgia O'Keeffe, Stieglitz indicated that he too was under the impression that the urinal had been submitted by a young woman. It is possible Duchamp was simply acknowledging the participation of one of his many women friends in this caper, but I consider it more likely that the ambisexual authorship of Fountain reflected how Marcel Duchamp, shortly to become Rose C'est la Vie, understood himself. Daoism emphasizes the vital role of yin, the female aspect of the world. Chapter 6 of the Tao Te Ching expands upon the portal or gateway metaphor we encountered in Chapter 1 and the generative, self-replenishing bellows energy of Chapter 5. The life force of the valley never dies. This is called the mysterious female. The gateway of the mysterious female is called the root of heaven and of earth. It is endless and only seems to be there. Using it, one never tires. In this chapter, and pervasively in the text, Ames and Hall write, the image of the dark, moist, and accommodatingly vacant interior of the vagina is used as an analogy for the fecundity of emptiness. The Tao Te Ching presents the female aspect as something to be cultivated. In chapter 28, we read, "Know the male, yet safeguard the female, and be a river gorge to the world. As a river gorge to the world, you will not lose your real potency. And not losing your real potency, you return to the state of the newborn babe." The return of the mind to its original preconditioned state, the mind of a newborn babe, is the goal of Daoist practice in general and Daoist inner alchemical practice in particular. Lydie Fischer-Sarrazin-Levasseur, who was briefly married to Marcel Duchamp in 1927, quoted his advice to her. "Find yourself, the pure self, like a child, newborn. An equilibrium is maintained, as in chess. You have to try to see everything as if for the first time, all the time." The Daoist metaphor for this equilibrium or essence, Jing, is a pearl of light between and behind the eyes, the center of spirit in Daoist meditation practice. This focal point, to use Stieglitz's term, is clearly visible thanks to his careful lighting in the head of the Buddha into which Stieglitz and Duchamp transformed a urinal. Another notable feature of this photograph of Fountain is the moist darkness of the protruding hole where the genitals would be, a feature that emphasizes its womb-like aspect, and which would surface again some 50 years later in Duchamp's Étant Donné. To truly comprehend what strikes the American mind still as Duchamp's shocking exploitation of sexuality is to understand why Fountain was not a cynical gesture of pissing on the establishment, but an affectionate, humorous, and tough-minded Daoist challenge to both the American art community and the American public. Behind Duchamp's works, another world really exists, his friend Robert Lebel asserted. About the unintelligibility of these works, Lebel wrote, Because of what he calls his delay in glass, Duchamp seems to have had in mind the anonymity of future archaeological excavations after the final collapse of our own civilization, unquote. As we approach the 100th anniversary of the large glass and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the unveiling of Étant Donné, could we be witnessing the final collapse of the walls that frame our Western civilization and its materialist view of reality? Can we be archaeologists enough to recognize the reality contained within Duchamp's delay in glass? Dada artworks were not intended to inspire disinterested contemplation or intellectual cognition. They are metaphors for reality. Nothing's intended to open the world's mind to new somethings. Dada never preached, Tristan Tzara wrote in 1953 in a statement translated by Marcel Duchamp. Having no theory to defend, it showed truths in action, and it is as action that what is commonly called art will henceforth have to be considered. Thank you.